Copper had been restless during the long ride, but now she stood perfectly still as Boone Carter dismounted. 20 years of absence should have meant decay, abandonment, the slow surrender of wood and metal to the relentless prairie wind. But the corral gate hung perfectly straight, its hinges oiled and silent. The barn door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness within, yet somehow suggesting someone had been there recently. Boone slid from his saddle, his boots hitting earth that felt familiar yet foreign beneath his feet. The ranch house windows stared back at him like empty eye sockets, but the glass was clean. Too clean for a place that should have been forgotten for 2 decades. His family was gone. That much he knew from the letter that had found him 3 towns over. What he didn't know was why the property looked like it had been waiting for him. His horse, a steady mare named Copper, snorted and pawed at the ground near the barn entrance. She had never been here before, yet she moved with purpose toward a specific spot in the dirt, her hooves scraping insistently at what appeared to be ordinary earth. But horses don't dig without reason, and as Boone watched, something metallic caught the afternoon light just beneath the surface. The chest was smaller than a coffin but larger than a jewelry box, its brass corners tarnished green with age. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay documents that should not have existed. Letters written in his father's hand to people Boone had never heard of. Deeds to land that wasn't supposed to be theirs. And a photograph of his father shaking hands with a man whose face had been carefully scratched out with a knife. But it was the final item that made Boone's hands shake. A letter addressed to him. Written in his father's careful handwriting, dated exactly 1 week before his death 5 years ago. A letter that should have been delivered long ago, but somehow never reached him. Boone's hands trembled as he held the letter. Yellowed with age, but still legible. The ink had faded slightly over the 5 years since his father's death, and he could smell the familiar scent of his father's pipe tobacco clinging to the paper. 1 week before Silas Ward had died, he had written this letter and hidden it in the chest, knowing someday his son would return. The letter was brief, written in the careful script Boone remembered from childhood lessons at the kitchen table. Son, if you're reading this, then Copper found what she was meant to find. The chest holds more than documents. It holds the truth about why you had to leave 20 years ago. You weren't running from shame. You were running from danger that still exists today. Trust no one in town until you know which side they served. The map in the bottom of the chest will show you where your real inheritance lies. But beware. Malachi Brooks has been watching this place, waiting for your return. He knows about the chest, and he knows what it contains. You have 3 days before he realizes you've found it. Use them wisely. Your loving father, Silas Ward. Boone sank onto an overturned bucket beside the barn wall, his mind reeling. 20 years ago, he had fled this place in shame after a fight that left his younger brother Emmett unconscious and bleeding in the very spot where Copper now stood. The whole town had turned against him, calling him violent, unstable, dangerous. His father had said nothing in his defense, had simply watched him ride away into the darkness with cold, disappointed eyes. Now this letter suggested everything he believed about that night was wrong. The map his father mentioned showed property lines that extended far beyond what Boone remembered their family owning. Mineral rights, water rights, land grants that would have made them wealthy beyond imagination. But if that were true, why had they lived in such modest circumstances? Why had his father worked himself to exhaustion on a ranch that barely sustained them? Copper nickered softly and tossed her head toward the house. Her ears pricked forward with alert tension. Boone followed her gaze and felt his heart skip. Fresh tire tracks led from the main road to the front porch, the impression so recent that dust was still settling in the afternoon air. Someone had been here within the last hour, someone who had driven directly to the house as if they belonged here. And judging by the depth of the tracks, they had left carrying something heavy, something they had taken from inside his family's abandoned home. The front door hung open like a mouth frozen mid-scream, revealing the stripped interior of what had once been Boone's childhood home. Every piece of furniture was gone, every picture frame removed from the walls, leaving behind only the faded outlines where they had hung for decades. Even the floorboards showed gaps where someone had pried up specific sections, searching for something hidden beneath. Boone stepped carefully across the threshold, his boot heels echoing in the empty space. The house smelled of recent activity, sawdust, sweat, and something else he couldn't identify. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung open, revealing bare shelves that had been thoroughly searched. But it was the kitchen table that made him stop cold. Someone had carved fresh words into the wooden surface with a sharp blade. Too late, Carter. Should have stayed gone. His father's bedroom had been ransacked more thoroughly than the rest of the house. The mattress lay slashed open, its stuffing scattered across the floor like cotton snow. Drawers had been pulled completely free of their dressers and smashed against the walls. But whoever had done this had missed something crucial. A loose floorboard beside the window that Boone remembered from his childhood, where his father used to hide Christmas presents. Beneath the board lay a small leather journal, its pages filled with his father's careful handwriting. The entries began 21 years ago, just 1 year before Boone had fled the ranch. Malachi Brooks made another offer today, doubled his previous bid for the mineral rights. He doesn't know I already discovered what lies beneath our land, but his persistence tells me someone else does know. I fear for my boy's safety. If something happens to me, I've left instructions with Clara Bell. She can be trusted, but no one else in town can be. The entries continued for months, detailing secret meetings, threats, and a growing conspiracy involving several prominent townspeople. But it was the final entry that made Boone's blood freeze. They took Emmett tonight, said they'd return him safely if I signed over the mineral rights. But I know too much about their other business now. They can't afford to let any of us live. I've sent word to Boone to come home, but I pray he stays away. What they don't know is that Clara Bell and I moved the real treasure 3 days ago. The map in the chest will lead them to nothing but empty holes. Footsteps echoed on the front porch, slow and deliberate. Someone was approaching the house, and from the measured pace they weren't trying to hide their presence. Boone folded the journal quickly and slipped it inside his jacket, then moved silently toward the back window. But as he reached for the latch, a familiar voice called out from the front room, a voice he hadn't heard in 20 years and had hoped never to hear again. Clara Bell stepped into the front room, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years Boone had missed. She moved with the same quiet grace he remembered from their brief courtship 20 years ago, but her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. She carried a shotgun with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to use it out of necessity, not choice. "You can come out, Boone Carter," she called softly. "I saw Copper outside, and that mare of yours has been trained too well to wander far from her rider. Besides, I've been watching this place for 3 hours, waiting for you to arrive." Boone emerged from the back room, his hands visible and empty. Clara Bell looked him over with the calculating gaze of someone who had learned not to trust easily. The years had been kinder to her than they had to him, but he could see the cost of whatever she had endured written in the tight lines around her eyes. "You found the chest," she said. "It wasn't a question. And you read your father's letter, the one I helped him write 1 week before he died, when his hands were shaking too badly to form the letters clearly, but his mind was still sharp enough to know you'd eventually come home." The revelation hit Boone like a physical blow. "You helped him write it, but how did you know I would find it today?" Clara Bell set her shotgun against the doorframe and pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket. "Because Malachi Brooks has been paying me to watch this place for 5 years. $20 a month to report if anyone came sniffing around the property. What he doesn't know is that your father paid me $50 a month for the same job, with very different instructions. I've been waiting 5 years for you to come home." She handed him the paper, and Boone recognized his father's genuine handwriting immediately. This is the real message he wanted you to have. The letter in the chest was theater, designed to send Brooks and his men on a wild chase while you learned the truth. Your father never trusted anyone completely, but he trusted me enough to be his insurance policy. The note was brief, but devastating. "Son, Clara Bell has the real map and the real story. Everything in the chest was bait for the wolves. Your brother Emmett is alive and safe, hidden where they'll never find him. But he's been waiting 20 years for you to come home and clear both your names. The fight that drove you away wasn't your fault. Emmett was drugged by Brooks' men to make him violent and unpredictable. You were protecting him, not attacking him. Come to the old line shack at Miller's Creek tomorrow at dawn. Come alone, and come ready to fight for what's rightfully yours." Clara Bell watched his face as he read, her expression unreadable. "Your father spent 5 years after you left gathering evidence against Brooks and his partners. They've been systematically stealing mineral rights from small ranchers across 3 counties, using violence and intimidation when legal means failed. Your family's land sits on top of the richest silver vein in the territory, but they needed you gone to claim it." Outside, Copper whinnied in alarm, and Clara Bell grabbed her shotgun with practiced speed. Through the front window, They could see a cloud of dust approaching fast from the main road. At least 6 riders, moving with the urgent purpose of men who had just discovered they'd been deceived. Malachi Brooks rode at the head of the group, his black coat billowing behind him like the wings of a carrion bird. Even from a distance, Boone could see the cold fury in the man's posture as he surveyed the empty chest lying open beside the barn. Brooks had aged into his cruelty over the past 20 years, his face bearing the hard lines of a man who had built his fortune on other people's misery. "Back door," Clara Bell whispered, already moving. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen that connects to a tunnel. Your father dug it during the war, in case raiders came through. It leads to the creek bed about 200 yards east." Boone grabbed the journal from his jacket and followed her through the ransacked kitchen. The cellar door was hidden beneath a section of loose floorboards, and Clara Bell lifted it with the ease of long practice. "Go," she urged. "I'll delay them here. Tell them you rode out an hour ago. They'll believe me because I'm supposed to be on their payroll. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." Clara Bell's laugh held no humor. "Boone Carter, I've been facing them alone for 5 years. One more conversation won't kill me. But if they catch you here with that journal, it'll destroy everything your father worked to preserve." The sound of boots on the front porch ended their debate. Boone squeezed through the cellar opening just as Brooks' voice echoed through the empty house, cold and controlled. "Miss Clara Bell, right on schedule as always. I trust you have news for me." From beneath the kitchen floor, Boone could hear every word of their conversation with crystal clarity. Clara Bell's voice carried the perfect note of nervous cooperation. "Mr. Brooks, sir. Boone Carter was here, just like you predicted. He found the chest about 2 hours ago, read everything inside, then rode out toward Miller's Creek like a man possessed." "And the contents of the chest? Did he take them with him?" "Most of them, sir. But he dropped this when he was mounting his horse. Seemed mighty upset about something he read." The floorboards creaked directly above Boone's head as someone walked across the kitchen. Brooks's voice grew sharper with interest. "This is very interesting indeed. A map to the old Henderson place where the mine shaft was sealed 15 years ago. And look at this notation in the margin. E.S. safe here until spring. Your friend, Mr. Carter, appears to believe his brother is hidden in an abandoned mine." Clara Bell's response was perfectly calculated. "Should I follow him, Mr. Brooks? He's got maybe an hour's head start, but that old mare of his isn't built for speed. No need. The Henderson mine is a dead end, literally. We'll simply wait at the mouth of the canyon and collect him when he emerges empty-handed and broken-hearted. Post 3 men there tonight. By tomorrow, Boone Carter will be desperate enough to listen to reason." The footsteps moved away from the kitchen, but Brooks's final words carried clearly through the house. "And Miss Clara Bell, your monthly payment is increasing to $30. You've proven yourself most valuable in this enterprise." After the riders departed, Clara Bell lifted the cellar door and helped Boone climb out. Her face was pale but determined. "They took the bait perfectly. Now we have until dawn to reach the real meeting place and warn Emmett that his brother is finally coming home." The old line shack at Miller's Creek stood exactly where Boone remembered it, but the structure had been reinforced with new timber and a solid metal door. Clara Bell led him through the pre-dawn darkness along a winding path that avoided the main trail, moving with the confident steps of someone who had walked this route many times before. Inside the shack, a lantern flickered to life, revealing a figure Boone barely recognized. Emmett Sloan had grown from the gangly teenager he remembered into a man built like a mountain, his shoulders broad from 20 years of hard labor, his face weathered but alert. A thick scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed both their lives. "Brother," Emmett said simply, rising from a wooden chair. The word carried no accusation, only a deep weariness that spoke of years spent waiting. "I wondered if you'd ever come home." Boone struggled to find his voice. "Emmett, I thought I'd hurt you badly. I thought you might have died from the injuries I caused. The whole town said I was violent, dangerous." Emmett shook his head slowly. "The whole town was paid to say that. Brooks needed you gone, and he needed me discredited. That night, 3 of his men cornered me behind the saloon and forced laudanum down my throat. Enough to make me act like a wild animal, enough to make me attack anyone who tried to help. When you found me, I was already half out of my mind from the drug." Clara Bell moved to a wooden crate in the corner and began unpacking supplies. "Your father and I moved Emmett here the night after the fight. We told everyone he had died from his injuries and was buried in the family plot. Brooks never thought to check if there was actually a body in that grave. Emmett walked to the window and peered through a gap in the boards. For 20 years, I've been Clara Bell's hired hand, working her property under a different name, Marcus Wheeler, if anyone asked. We've been gathering evidence against Brooks and his partners, documenting every illegal land grab, every forged deed, every family they've destroyed or driven away. He turned back to face Boone, and the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. Do you know how many ranchers have lost everything because we couldn't act without you here? How many families have been ruined while we waited for the day you'd come home and help us fight back? Boone felt the weight of 20 years of guilt and misunderstanding crash down on him. I should never have left. I should have stayed and fought for the truth. You were 19 years old, Clara Bell interjected firmly. Brooks had the sheriff, the judge, and half the town council in his pocket. If you'd stayed, you'd be dead, and Emmett would be dead, and we'd have no evidence to present. Your father made the hard choice to let you go so that someday, when we were ready, you could come back and finish what he started. Emmett pulled a thick folder from beneath his bed and spread its contents across the small table. Maps, photographs, signed affidavits, and financial records covered every inch of the surface. This is what 20 years of patience looks like, brother. Every crime Brooks has committed, every law he's broken, every life he's destroyed. Tomorrow, we take this evidence to the territorial marshal in Silver Ridge. But first, we have to survive the night, because Brooks is going to realize he's been played. The sound of approaching horses shattered the quiet dawn air. At least 8 riders moving fast along the main trail toward the creek. Brooks had discovered the deception sooner than expected, and now his men were spreading out to search every possible hiding place in the area. Emmett moved with practiced efficiency, gathering the evidence files and stuffing them into a waterproof saddlebag. There's another way out through the back ravine, but someone needs to delay them here long enough for the others to escape with the documents. Boone checked his revolver and moved toward the door. That someone is me. I've been running from this fight for 20 years. It ends today. No, Clara Bell said firmly. It ends when we deliver this evidence to the marshal, not when you get yourself killed trying to prove a point. Brooks wants you angry and reckless. Don't give him what he wants. Through the window, they could see riders spreading out along the creek bed, methodically checking every structure and outcropping. Brooks himself remained mounted near the main trail, directing his men with sharp hand gestures. Even from a distance, his fury was visible in every movement. Emmett secured the last of the files and shouldered a rifle. Clara Bell is right. We stick to the plan. She takes the evidence to Silver Ridge while we create enough confusion to cover her escape. But we don't engage unless we have no choice. The back door of the shack opened onto a narrow ravine that wound upward through thick brush toward higher ground. Clara Bell slipped out first, moving silently toward where her horse waited hidden among the rocks. The morning light was growing stronger, making concealment more difficult with each passing minute. One of Brooks's men had broken away from the main group and was riding directly toward their position, his horse picking its way carefully along the creek bank. He would reach the shack within minutes, and once he spotted the reinforced door and fresh tracks around the building, their location would be compromised. Boone made his decision quickly. He stepped out the front door with his hands visible, calling out in a voice that carried across the water. Looking for someone, Brooks. The effect was immediate and explosive. Every rider turned toward the sound of his voice, and Brooks spurred his horse forward with a snarl of triumph. Boone Carter, 20 years of running and you finally grew tired of being a coward. 20 years of believing your lies, Boone replied, walking slowly toward the creek. But I know the truth now. I know what you did to my brother, what you did to my family, and what you've been doing to every small rancher in this territory. Brooks dismounted 30 feet away, his hand resting on his gun butt. The truth is that you're trespassing on my land, boy. This creek and everything around it belongs to me now, bought and paid for through proper legal channels. Forged deeds and murdered witnesses aren't proper legal channels, Boone said. But I suppose when you own the sheriff and the judge, the law becomes whatever you want it to be. The insult hit its mark. Brooks' face flushed with rage, and his hand moved toward his weapon. You always did have too much mouth and not enough sense. Carter, some things never change. Behind him, Boone could hear the faint sound of hoofbeats receding up the ravine as Clara Bell made her escape with the evidence. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, their mission would succeed. The truth would finally reach someone with the power to act on it. Brooks drew his gun first, but 20 years of hard living had made him slower than he remembered. Boone's revolver cleared leather a split second faster, and the crack of gunfire echoed across the creek bed like thunder. Brooks staggered backward, clutching his right shoulder, his weapon spinning away into the shallow water. The other riders moved to surround Boone, but Emmett's rifle spoke from the doorway of the line shack, sending them scrambling for cover behind rocks and trees. "I count 8 of them, brother," he called out. "But half of them are boys who don't know what they're fighting for." "You boys listen to me," Boone shouted, keeping his gun trained on Brooks. "Your boss has been lying to you about everything. The territorial marshal will be here by noon with a federal warrant for Brooks's arrest. Anyone still standing with him when the law arrives will hang alongside him." 3 of the younger men exchanged uncertain glances. They had signed on to intimidate homesteaders and forge documents, not to fight a war against federal marshals. One by one, they backed away from their positions and rode out, leaving only Brooks's most loyal and desperate men. Brooks pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You think you've won something here, Carter? You think your pathetic little brother and that school teacher can bring me down? I own this territory. I own the judges, the sheriffs, the land office. Your evidence will disappear before it reaches Silver Ridge." "Maybe," Boone admitted, "but Clara Bell isn't riding to Silver Ridge. She's riding to the territorial capital, where your money and influence don't reach. By tonight, your crimes will be in the hands of federal authorities who can't be bought." The revelation hit Brooks like a physical blow. He had spent 20 years building a network of corruption that controlled everything within 100 miles. But he had never considered that his enemies might reach beyond his sphere of influence. Emmett emerged from the line shack, his rifle ready, but not aimed. "It's over, Brooks. The smart play now is to surrender and hope the federal court shows mercy." Brooks laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Mercy? Boy, I've killed federal marshals before. Adding 2 more bodies to the count won't cost me any sleep." He reached inside his coat with his good hand, pulling out a small derringer. "If I'm going to hang anyway, I'm taking you Carter boys with me." The hidden gun was almost clear of his coat when Copper, who had been grazing quietly near the creek, suddenly reared and struck out with her front hooves. The mare had wandered close to Brooks during the confrontation, and now her powerful kick caught him squarely in the chest, sending him flying backward into the rocky creek bed. Brooks lay motionless in the shallow water, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. The derringer fell from his lifeless fingers and sank beneath the surface with barely a splash. The remaining men stared at their dead leader in shocked silence. Without Brooks's commanding presence, they seemed to shrink into themselves, suddenly looking like the common criminals they had always been. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. 3 weeks later, Boone stood in the rebuilt kitchen of his family's ranch house, watching Clara Bell hang fresh curtains in the windows. The territorial marshal had arrived exactly as promised, and the evidence she had delivered to the capital had triggered the largest corruption investigation in the territory's history. 17 officials had been arrested, including the sheriff and 2 judges who had spent years covering for Brooks's crimes. The mineral rights to the Carter family land had been legally restored, along with compensation for 20 years of stolen profits. But more importantly, the official record now showed the truth about the night Boone had fled. Emmett's testimony, supported by medical evidence of the laudanum poisoning, had cleared both brothers of any wrongdoing. Emmett emerged from the barn, leading Copper by her reins toward the new corral they had built that morning. The mare had become something of a local legend after the territorial newspapers reported how she had accidentally killed the notorious criminal Malachi Brooks. Visitors came from 3 counties away just to see the horse that had ended 20 years of tyranny with a single kick. "She's earned her retirement," Emmett said with a grin, releasing Copper into the paddock where she immediately began rolling in the fresh dirt, though I suspect she knows exactly what she did that day. Horses are smarter than most people give them credit for. Clara Bell looked up from her work, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Speaking of smart decisions, have you 2 figured out what you're going to do with all that silver money when the mine starts producing?" Boone wrapped his arms around her waist, still amazed that she had agreed to marry him after 20 years of separation. "Emmett wants to use his share to buy the old Henderson place and turn it into a horse breeding operation. As for me, I think I've had enough adventures for one lifetime. I just want to rebuild this ranch and raise a family here." The sound of approaching riders made them all turn toward the main road. But these were friendly faces. The new sheriff, an honest man sent from the territorial capital, rode alongside the federal marshal who had overseen Brooks's investigation. Behind them came a wagon loaded with lumber and supplies donated by the families Brooks had wronged over the years. "Afternoon, folks," the sheriff called out as he dismounted. "Just wanted to let you know that the last of Brooks' men were sentenced this morning. 10 years hard labor for the lot of them. Justice may move slow sometimes, but it gets there eventually." The marshal nodded his agreement. "The territorial governor also wanted me to deliver this personally." He handed Boone an official document bearing the territorial seal. "Full pardons for both Carter brothers, with the government's formal apology for the injustice you suffered. Your names are cleared in every county record from here to the state capitol." As the officials rode away, Boone unfolded the document and read it aloud to his family. The words made it official, but the feeling of freedom had started the day Copper had unearthed the buried chest. Everything that followed had been inevitable once the truth came to light. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Clarabelle rested her head against Boone's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Copper hadn't started digging that day?" Boone considered the question seriously. "I think she would have found it eventually. Some truths are too big to stay buried forever." He looked out across the land that was truly theirs now, free and clear, then down at the engagement ring on Clarabelle's finger. Sometimes the best treasures are the ones that find you when you're ready to receive them. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.